Welcome everyone to our creative side chat. I believe this is our fourth creative side chat already for ComicCon at home, care of the Chuck Jones Gallery. And as we get into this, and today is Iron Man. I figure I've already done Cap and Spider-Man. It's time to don the Iron Man. I'm going to bring in another Iron Man, someone who is a legend and has been around, one of the few left that have worked in Chuck's actual unit. And let me tell you, I've heard his stories live before. Not only is this man wildly talented, he is absolutely hilarious. So what I want to do now is bring in the legend, Mr. Willie Ito. Willie, welcome to the Creative Side chat.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to see the Chuck Jones and the Looney Tune fans.
So I'm sure there's about 80,000 people watching, so don't get nervous. But as we dive in, it was a thrill last year at JFG when I got to meet you and hear the stories with you and Jared, the whole Three Tuners clan, right? But specifically when you got into your experiences, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And then as I got to know more about you after, there was a whole new level of respect just from, you know, your childhood all the way up to where you are now. And I think what I wanted to do is let people in on that info that I learned that I think would be fascinating for them to learn, and how this all began. And I want to take you back to World War II before we get into cartoons, and it's a fascinating story. And would you mind, you were Japanese internment camp with your family, correct? And at what age was that?
Well, I was interned at age 8, spent 3 years, and returned at age 11. And so those 3 years, I guess you might say my formative years, I was behind barbed wire fence.
So, you know, yeah, obviously none of us really now have any idea what that's like. And, you know, you're in the country that you live in and yet in an internment camp. What, do you have memories of that? Something that sticks out?
Well, I'll go back a little bit. I first got interested in becoming an animator cartoonist at age 5. See, that was before television. So twice a week, every Wednesday and every Sunday, the family, we would all go down to Japantown, have a nice dinner, and then we would walk to our neighborhood theater. It was called the Uptown Theater, and they ran all the Warner Brother cartoons. And so whenever that red target would come on the screen, I would get all excited. And of course, by then, my feeling for becoming a cartoonist was pretty much cemented. And so it was that infamous day, December 7th, 1941. I remember my uncle, who had just graduated high school, and he was dating my aunt-to-be. And so they took me along for a Sunday picnic down in Santa Cruz, which is sort of a resort town about 70 miles south of San Francisco. And so, you know, we did the roller coaster and the boardwalk, and then we retired to the beach, spread out our blanket, and had our picnic lunch, and just kind of enjoying the day. The fog rolled in, and so we thought, oh my gosh, it's getting a little cold. So let's head on back to the city. So as we approach San Francisco city limits on the Bayshore Highway, there was a lot of commotion, and the traffic was coming to a screeching halt. And as it turned out, the military was stationed at the city limits, checking ID to make sure that you lived in the city. I kind of feel at this time that they were probably stopping all Asians entering the city. And so we were good to go. And as we drove into the city, now we saw these news kids on the corners selling newspapers with the headline "War." Well, at that time, I never knew what the meaning of the word war was. So we finally got to my home, and my whole family was gathered, and my grandparents, and my aunt, and uncles, and so my first thought was, oh, I guess we're all getting together for Sunday dinner, and so I was a little bit excited, but then seeing the look on my mother's face, it was, a lot of concern and anguish. And she was so relieved to see us because back then, no cell phones. So there was no way for her to get in touch with my uncle or vice versa. So we really hadn't heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that was the beginning. Our community, Japantown, which is like little Tokyo here in Los Angeles, it was the hub of the Japanese American community, and the whole community was just totally concerned. What's going to happen, and the whole thing. At that point, we didn't know that Roosevelt was going to sign a decree that ordered us incarcerated. So, but there was still a lot of concern. And so Monday morning, it was business as usual. I went to school, and one of my classmates would just start crying in class. And the teacher would soothe him, and he'd stop. But then again, he'd just start crying. Well, it turned out that his father was a Buddhist minister, and he was on the pulpit giving his Sunday sermon. The FBI agents just stormed into the church and arrested him right off of the pulpit, not knowing or not giving any kind of word as to where they were going to send him to, take him to, whatever. The family was all up in arms, not knowing what happened. So that was somewhat traumatic. Then I came home from school one day, and I noticed that my mother and father were sitting in the living room with a very stoic look on their faces. And then I noticed two big FBI agents with overcoats on and a fedora hat, like a Humphrey Bogart movie, and these guys were big. And what they were doing is they would visit Japanese American homes looking for contrabands, things like samurai swords, which was an heirloom, and maybe weapons and kitchen knives, anything that could be construed as a contraband was being taken away. And that was somewhat traumatic. And of course, my father, he was born in Hawaii, but went back to Japan for his schooling. So when he came to the States, the family gave him the family heirloom katana sword, which he treasured. But it was confiscated, and the FBI guy said, "Well, don't worry, you'll eventually get it back." We never got a receipt or anything of that nature. So how are we going to retrieve it? And years later, my friend Jerry Eisenberg, he used to frequent gun shows where they sold swords. And he says, wow, you should see all the confiscated katana swords on sale, some military swords and samurai swords and all that. So I figured, well, maybe my father's sword was sold at one of these gun shows, So the day finally came where we were ordered to evacuate. What we were ordered to do was to just take what you're able to carry with your two hands. So the bare necessity was basically the order of the day. And I had by then amassed a nice collection of comic books, which I had to leave behind. And we all met at a central location. It was either the community church, community center, the YMCA was where we assembled. They had buses all lined up, and military guards at the entry of the bus. We wore ID tags, and these military guards, I guess they were told not to look at us eye to eye, just look straight forward and look very serious. So we boarded the buses, and of course the old folks, those that immigrated from Japan to seek a new life in America, they had lost everything. They had to sell their farms, their businesses, whatever personal belongings like automobiles and things like that. They either gave it away or got 10 cents on the dollar back then. And so they virtually had nothing left. So when we boarded the buses, our first stop was Tanforan. Now, Tanforan is like Santa Anita here. It's a racetrack. And so the early arrivals, because the barracks were still being built in the inner part of the race thing, that the early arrivals had to literally live in the horse stables. The stables had a stench. The floor was compact manure and dirt, and you had spiders, huge spiders in the corner of the stable. And then leaning against the walls were army cots, folded. So the men in the family, they unfolded the cots and set it up. And mattresses, where's the mattresses? They said, oh yeah, see those bags? You take those bags and go up, and there's stacks of hay. Fill those bags with hay, and that's your mattress. Can you imagine if you had allergies or hay fever or whatever, to have to sleep on those hay and the horse stench? That horse stench never went away. Then we were one of the lucky ones that arrived, and the barracks were being built, and so the early barracks that were completed, we were able to live in those. But then I used to visit my friends at the horse stables and all. And so we kind of put up with Tanforan for about 6 months. By then, the camps that were being built, there were 10 camps to house 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans on the West Coast from Seattle to San Diego. And so of the 10 camps, the camp that I ended up with was called Topaz, in the middle of the Utah desert. So we got bused to the train station. Then we boarded the trains, and we were ordered to keep the blinds closed because, first of all, they didn't want us to know what our destination was. And secondly, when we stopped at the different stations, some of the town folks knew that the train was housing a bunch of Japanese, so they would come by the train and yell, the wartime obscenities and throw stones at the train, and you could hear boom, boom, bang, bang, and whatever. It was scary, as an 8-year-old experiencing something like this was rather traumatic. And my sister, who was only 3, well, she was totally oblivious to all this craziness. And of course, my grandparents, they were elderly and they were immigrants, spoke limited English, and they were pretty much terrified. But our first encounter when we got to the little town of Delta, Utah, where the train let us off, then we boarded very dusty, dirty trucks and buses, and it took us 16 miles inland to the middle of the desert. And in the distance, as we approached, you could see rows and rows of black tar paper barracks. And it was summer, so it was hot and very dusty. That particular desert had alkali dust, so it was like white powder. My grandfather, I remember, had on his overcoat. He was wearing a San Francisco vest, because San Francisco back then, we all dressed up. And so he had on this dark suit and his overcoat and dark fedora hat. And then I looked at him, and he was all covered with this white alkali dust. So I remember my mother saying, well, I think once we get to the barrack, we could get out of the dust. So we hightailed it to our assigned barrack. Mine was 3112C. It was block 31, barrack 12, apartment C. So we went in there, and it was stifling hot because there was no insulation. It was a wood structure covered with black tar paper and no insulation in between. So we felt the summer heat in the winter cold. And that was our environment for the next 3 years. And I guess being that I was so interested in being a cartoonist, a lot of my friends were out, playing in the dirt and playing touch football and baseball and cops and robbers and the whole bit. But I chose to kind of stay in. Now, we would be issued Sears and Roebuck or Montgomery Ward catalogs every 3 months, because we had to order our needs through the catalog. And so every 3 months, when the new catalog would come, I would get the expired catalog and sit down and start drawing little figures and bouncing balls and whatever on the margins of the catalog. And then I would flip it, and I made my own little flip book, which you might say was my early foray into the art of animation. I kept going on and on, maybe.
Oh, I love, and what I love about that story is, and why I asked you about that is because it's something that, in a setting like that, especially when before that, you mentioned at age 5 and you're getting to see these cartoons in the theater, and then you get put in that setting, and it could have derailed that love of animation, that love of art and film, but instead you're in a setting that's not great, and you found a way to create and be creative with that and to animate and to still pursue your passion. And I love that story that you told, because I think it's such a wonderful kind of blossoming flower, right, in a situation that couldn't have been, and then look at what it did. And I wanted to use that to propel what we're getting into now. And you go from flipping in a catalog, right, and you're and a bouncing ball and all those kind of good things. And how did you get into? Did you go to art school? What was the next step after everything was done and you were back in before you get into feature film? Because you've worked at studios like Disney and Warner Brothers, and we're going to get into that. What was the next step right before you got into your profession, animating?
Well, upon return, we returned 1 month before VJ Day, Victory Japan Day. So the war was winding down, and so the camps were allowing everyone to return to their homes. Unfortunately, many of those came back, but they had nothing to come back to because they sold off everything and got rid of, you know. So consequently, they had to stay again on army cots in the gymnasium of the YMCA or the Buddhist church or the Christian church or, you know, wherever. And so it was like starting from scratch again. We were very fortunate because my father was born in Hawaii, so he was what you might call a Nisei, second generation, and he was a little more optimistic. So in 1939, he purchased our home, our first home. And so when this all transpired, he invited one of his best friend, happened to be Chinese, to come live in our home for the duration. And so when we came back, Chuck was his name. He happened to be a house painter by trade. And so the house was all painted, all the bedrooms are freshly painted, and it was a nice homecoming. Kind of made you feel guilty that you were living, you know, like before the war, where a lot of our friends were, you know, having such a rough time. So naturally, the fall term started. I started grammar school. I continued my love of drawing, and I guess I got very good grades in art class, and my teacher could see that I sort of excelled in that area. So I was like the class painted the murals and you know, whatever design, like the graduation diploma cover I did. And so it carried on into high school. Now in San Francisco, because it's such a compact city, they had a number of high schools, but you weren't restricted in going to whatever district you happened to be in. And so I chose Polytechnic High only because it was the only high school in the city that offered cartooning 101. So naturally I went there, and Polytechnic happened to have the varsity championship football team. Of course, you might say, endeared myself to the big jocks by being the guy that did the cartoon posters for all the big games in the city. And each city high school had a mascot, like Polytechnic or the Poly, and they had the Lowell High School Redskins or Indians. It might be politically incorrect today, but then they had the Bears and others. So I had a ball making these posters because I do my version of the animated animal characters and all. So I went through high school as being somewhat well known because of my artistic things. And then, of course, I went on to San Francisco City College. And that's where the turning point was, because I, again, uh, was doing quite well in the art class. And then when it was time to graduate, uh, I knew in my heart I wanted to be an animator. But at that time, all my friends, because we were all, just came out of a camp, we wanted to excel. So all of my friends went to University of California, Stanford, USF. They got degrees in pharmacy, pre-med, nursing, and a lot of the gals went into teaching. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be a cartoonist, but that seems so inhumanitarian. Maybe I should do something a little more substantial with my art. So I went up to my teacher and I said, yeah, I think I'm going to change my uh, vocation. And I think I'm going to go into medical illustrating. He looked me straight in the eye and shook his head and said, no, you're not. You're going to go to Los Angeles. You're going to go to Chenard's Art Institute, and you're going to become an animator. And
well, thank goodness for that teacher.
I'm sorry?
I said, thank goodness for that teacher.
Yeah, it was really something. So Carl Beats was his name, but he was a protege of Don Graham from Chenard's. So he wrote Don Graham a personal letter saying, introducing me. And armed with that letter in my high school portfolio, I was awarded a scholarship at the Chenard's. And so here is where now it begins. I'm in Don Graham's life drawing class, and in the corner, there's Chuck Jones sitting there. And then sitting, almost next to him was Abe Levital. And then Dick Thompson was in class. Yeah, I really didn't know who these people were except for Chuck. I knew the name Chuck. And so one of the classmates said, hey, that's Chuck Jones from Warner Brothers. At that time, we all called him Charles M. Jones, And I thought, oh my God, he's one of my heroes. And so being at Chenard's, and my instructor was Mark Davis, who was one of the Disney's 9 Old Men.
Like Disney's 9 Old Men, Mark Davis?
Yeah.
Your instructor.
At that time, there was a little studio that was very, very popular, UPA. And one of the instructors from UPA, who happened to be an ex-Disneyite, was a fellow named Teehee, and he was teaching a cartooning class. And so I just kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I am certainly in my element. so I was pretty much blown away. And so I felt rather confident. And so I thought, since I'm down here in LA, I think I'm going to go visit my favorite studios, which happen to be Disney and Warner Brothers. So I made a visit to Johnny Burton at Termite Terrace. And he was good enough to review my portfolio. And then he says, yeah, well, we would hire you right away, but you need training. We don't train here. We only hire someone that's trained. I said, oh, okay, I'll be back. And then I made my visit to Disney Studio, and 2 weeks later, I got hired at Disney Studio, and I got assigned to the Lady and the Tramp unit. And of course, the very first assignment was the iconic spaghetti kissing scene,
Mm-hmm.
But when Lady and the Tramp was completed, Sleeping Beauty was 3 months away. So they said, well, you guys will have to take a little time off. And so I immediately picked up the phone, called Johnny Burton, and I said, Hey, Mr. Burton, I'm trained now. He said, come on in. So that Monday morning, I started at Termite Terrace along with a fellow roommate. His name was Corny Cole. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Corny Cole.
Yeah.
So Corny and I together started at Termite Terrace on the same day. And then when Chuck asked for uh, the two of us to join his unit, we were both invited in at the same time. And so it was great.
So you went from animating at Disney, right, which was a training at Disney, which was a state of the art,
Oh boy.
right, and not bad. And that's what's currently they still have those facilities there. And then you walk into aptly named Termite Terrace. What's your first reaction? Like, what did you? Well, let me ask this: did you notice a difference?
Oh yeah. The minute I walked in, and it was a warm summer day, and of course, in the morning it was okay, but then in the afternoon it got rather stifling because they had no uh, air conditioning per se. Uh, we all had to open our windows for fresh air. Back then, animators all smoked like chimney, and so the whole building, the minute you walked in, smelled like like an ashtray, I guess. And then when you open the window, see, back in the 50s, LA was very smoggy. And so opening the windows was no relief. You know, now your eyes were watering from the cigarette smoke, the smog, and then our light, well, our lamp was incandescent lamp, whereas at Disney it was all fluorescent, and then the animation uh, drawing board had fluorescent, but at Termite Terror it was light bulbs, and those light bulbs, you know, after it's on for a while, would get pretty hot. So after you finished about 2 or 3 drawings, you had to turn it off and wait till your drawing board cooled off. so, you know, little things like that. You know, in retrospect, I think I am so glad that I experienced these things, and of course, you know, the seasoned animators, guys like Ken Harris and Ben Washam and everything. You know, it 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 was actually a joke after a while. So much so that on the very last day of Termite Terrace, now we were going to be moving to Jack Warner's state-of-the-art studio in Burbank. So, so after enjoying Bloody Marys all day that Ben provided us in the water cooler, um, it was about 4 o'clock, and it was time to pop open the champagne and just say farewell to Termite Terrace. And some of the guys got exuberant, and they went to the storage, and they walked out with stacks of cells, and they threw it on the hardwood floor that was nothing but slivers because it was never maintained, and all that walking traffic, that I'm sure the hardwood floor was beautifully polished when it was new, but now it was, you don't dare walk on it barefooted. And we would make a running start and slide on top of all these beautiful cells, leaving uh, uh, a kind of a stream of Bugs Bunny colors and Porky Pig colors, and it was really something to behold, especially now realizing how valuable these
Uh,
cells are.
yeah, I was gonna say you painted the floor with some characters, and yeah. So I would you go for, and as we transition into some Warner Brothers, I wanted to put up. So Willie's got some fantastic artwork that he's done, and Scott Ryder, if you can put up the link there to chuckjonescatalog.com/Willie-Ito. And we've got pieces. Yeah, well, we're gonna scroll through a couple of these, and then I want to dive in a little bit more to you're in an art class being taught by Mark Davis.
Yeah.
With Chuck Jones drawing next to you.
Yeah, right.
I would have died. I don't know how you made it out of there. So when you get into Chuck's unit and you're animating in there for the first time, how old are you when you get into Chuck's unit?
Okay, I was 19 when I started at Disney, so I think I was probably 20.
So you're 20.
I was not old enough to drink yet, so you could say, and so that I remember vividly. So yeah, working in Chuck's unit and being asked to join the unit. Because, excuse me, let me just turn that on. Okay, because see, when Corny and I started in the bullpen at Termite Terrace, there was about 8 guys that was already in the bullpen, just working away, waiting for their chance to move up. Now, Corny and I come in, and we're there for a month, maybe 6 weeks, in the in between bullpen, and then to be invited to the Chuck Jones unit. I'm sure there was a lot of hard feelings and resentment with some of these guys that were hanging in there, but later, we all became friends, of course, and all that. But see, in the bullpen, you get assigned a scene as you finish. So the very first scene I started at Termite Terrace was one of Frizz's Speedy Gonzalez pictures. Now at Disney, I was barely making one drawing an hour. So if I did 8 a day, that was good. Then at Termite Terrace, I didn't know what the count would be, but on my very first day, I did 13 Speedy Gonzalez in-betweens, and I was quite proud of myself. But then I later found out, no, you have to do at least 30 drawings a day at Warner Brothers. So I was in for a little bit of a rude awakening. But because of the Disney training, where we were very meticulous, I think, for Chuck, seeing good tight drawings, even though it was, well, basically by then, well, when I was doing in-betweens, I made sure my in-betweens were really nice lines and everything. So when the scenes are finished in the bullpen, it's taken back to the animator, and then the animator would check. And apparently, he liked what he saw of my in-between. So he says, "Well, who's this?" He said, "Well, it's a new kid from Disney in the bullpen." He said, and so apparently Ken says, "Well, I'm going to be losing my assistant, and I'm shopping for a new assistant, so I would like him." And then Dick Thompson was also looking for an assistant animator, and Corny Cole fit the bill. So
the two of you get elevated pretty a decent ranking almost off the start. Not a bad way to begin your career with Chuck, I would say.
Yeah, Chuck, and then working under Ken Harris, who is one of the premier animators for Chuck. Yeah, and when I think back to the group Chuck had Ben Washam and Abe Levital and Ken Harris, and then of course Dick Thompson and yeah, and of course Mike Maltese and then Maurice Noble, you know, and oh, it was really a group. Of course, at that time, I didn't know all of the personnel, and I barely got to know the gang in Fritz Friedling's unit or Bob McKimson because they were like upstairs. But the Chuck's group, you know, Bob Ransford was Abe's assistant, and we all became a real tight-knit group.
Well, so I wanted to ask you, as there was kind of there was an air to being in that animation department, right? As you kind of get elevated in it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Chuck would take his animators out to lunch.
Yes.
And so as he would take you guys, or take the animators out to lunch, once you got into that slot, what was the film, before I get into that lunch, what was the film that you got to animate on for
Well,
Chuck?
basically, we would do, you know, very simple scenes in the Coyote Roadrunner series, you know, and so some of the scenes were kind of a long shot of the coyote pulling the rope, lifting up a big boulder that he's going to set up in the path of the Roadrunner, and of course a lot of the dust that the Roadrunner left behind, and yeah, so you know there were little bones that we would be able to you know show what we could do. But see, I as much as I enjoyed the art of animating, I was more leaning towards being a layout man and a character designer. And Chuck knew this. So every so often, you know, like a film that Chuck would have Ken Harris direct, Ken would say, well, you designed the incidental characters in this picture. And so finally, Chuck was named the animation director on the series that Warner's was doing, the Dr. Frank Baxter science series, and which was directed and produced by a fellow named Owen Crump, who was a big-time director on the Warner lot. So we, and when I say we, there was three of us. A fellow named Lou Scheimer, who later became head of or owned the Filmation production. Then there was Bob Singer. Of course, you guys all know Bob Singer. And then myself. The three of us were assigned off the lot, up the street, right across from the main studio lot, in a nice office to do the storyboards, character designs on this Frank Baxter thing. So I felt that, oh my gosh, you know, Chuck is giving me this great opportunity to show what I can do as a layout man. And so that was a good gig. And so I guess little by little, Chuck recognized where I wanted to go. And so Fritz Freeling was training Holly Pratt, his layout man, to be a director. So Holly needed to train a layout man. So Fritz went to Chuck and says, you think I could borrow Willie for one picture as a layout man? And so I spent 6 weeks over in Fritz's unit and laid out my very first Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam, a film called Prince Violent. And that, gave me my very first Warner Brother Looney Tunes screen credit.
Nice. Which something to cherish for sure. And
yes, I got the.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then Scott Ryder, what we're going to do, Willie, is I'm going to show some more images as you're going to see those on screen, and I've got a couple more questions for you as we take a look at these images. So you've worked on some really the top, considered the best animated short film of all time, and then I think another one that's in the top 5. So you go from what you were working there to One Froggy Evening and What's Opera Doc.
Right.
Did you at the time, and I want to get to the couch, to the lunch, I want to get to the lunch story with Chuck. Oh. You're at the end, right? That's coming after this. So when you're working on One Froggy Evening and what, did you feel something about those films? Were there films that you were working on when you're like, man, you kind of knew when you were working on it that it was going to be something pretty big?
Yeah, What's Opera Doc, listening to the soundtrack, and once a week, Chuck would have a pencil test session. So the scenes that were pretty much animated, it would still be in pencil test form, and it'd be strung together, and then Verena was the gal that ran that, and we would see the film progress. And then listening to the soundtrack, Kill the Wabbit and all that, But it was still a little hard for me to see it overall. And, when you're working week after week, well, every 6 weeks we have a new picture to work on, and you see it in various different stages, you don't really realize what a classic that it's going to turn out to be. And same with One Froggy Evening. It was a one shot, and I didn't really think too much about it, except for the fact that Ken would do a lot of the dancing scenes. I think Chuck kind of felt Ken had that real good feeling for dancing. And so, Jay Michigan dancing, singing, "Hello, my baby, hello." And I would do the assistant work on all of that. And I thought, wow, this, not realizing, again, that it was eventually going to become one of the classics. So working on What's Opera Doc with Bugs Bunny and Elmer, Kill the Wabbit, jumping around and bouncing. It was fun working on it. And but when it was completed, they would call the entire studio. All 3 units would all assemble in the projection room, and they would run the latest cartoon that's just been completed. And when they ran, What's Opera Doc and One Froggy Evening, it really blew my mind, because it was the way Chuck and Mike Maltese could tell a story in pantomime, and how that One Froggy Evening just worked with expressions and that blink blink and the classic Chuck Jones takes. It was really something. And then of course What's Opera Doc, the same. Yeah, I have to say, and it's so different from what Frizz would be doing, the kind of cartoon. And I have to say, Chuck would give me the evil eye in the projection room, because when they would screen a Frizz Freeling cartoon, I would be rolling on the floors, and Chuck would look back. I guess he recognized my laughing, and he looked back and gave me one of those Chuck Jones look.
Maybe that look right there. Was it this look?
Yeah, right. That bulldog look.
Right? Chuck's just kind of get, because that would, we'll just say, Willie, you're Kitty on that one, and Chuck will be Mark Anthony, just giving you the look on the in the projection
Right.
room.
Yeah. Worked on.
So, well, and one thing about, Chuck was, you worked with him for a decent amount of time in his unit, but really, and I loved hearing this story, and I think everybody should hear this story. Chuck was a great mentor, and did a lot to pour into his people, and what he would do, and was also very gracious. And there was one particular moment, I think, where he was very gracious, and you got to go out to lunch with the animation crew, but you were not yet of age, over 21.
Yes. Well.
Would you mind indulging me on that
Oh.
story?
Okay. I hope my kids aren't watching. No, anyway. Chuck had us animate every 6 weeks. So Corny Cole, Bob Bransford, and myself, we would alternate animating every 6 weeks. And so when you were actually animating, you were invited to the animators' lunch on Friday that Chuck would have for his regular animators. And the smokehouse in Burbank was the favorite spot. And of course, they fancied this deep dish martini. And so anyway, it was my 6 weeks of animating. And so I was invited to the animators' lunch. And so I was there, and I felt quite honored. And the guys were having their Gibsons and Bloody Marys and all that. And I used to hear about the famous smokehouse deep dish martini. So I said, oh, I'm going to try one of those. So I tried one. Hey, went down quite smoothly. And I got the buzz, and it was great. So I thought, hey, maybe I'll have another one. So I had 2 deep dish martinis, which is equivalent to 4, because the deep dishes were doubles. And so we eventually got back to the studio, and everyone went to their own respective offices, and the doors were closed. And I was sitting at my desk, and I was feeling no pain and feeling very good. And I don't know what made me do this, but I got up and I went next door to Chuck's office, and Chuck says, come in. Then I opened the door and I says, I'm gassed. Woo, plop. Right on my face, right in Chuck's office. And didn't remember anything after that until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm laid out on Chuck's couch. And Chuck I see the back of his head. He's hunched over his drawing board. And I go, and Chuck says, are you okay? I never felt so sick in my life, and embarrassed, and oh my gosh, I was going to give Walter Lance a call and see if he could hire me.
I love that story. I thought it was hilarious when I heard it the first time, and it's just as good as. And believe it or not, like, time can fly pretty fast with you, Willie, and we're already coming almost up to an hour. I'm going to push it a little bit over an hour because there's a couple things that I want to touch on, and then I would love to have a part 2, especially with you and Jerry, and maybe you guys have like the 3 tuners, right? So Tony, and maybe we can do something with everybody, because there's so much more here to unpack, and so many
sure.
From Chuck's unit, and specifically Termite Terrace, what you guys worked on, that kind of collaboration, what Chuck did in his, mentorship with you. But what I wanted to touch on before, we had 4 time left today, and that was a couple of different things.
Okay.
The 2 things. One, is, and we've seen the artwork up. Scott has put it up with the chuckjonescatalog.com/Willie-Ito. It's got some amazing pieces from you, all originals. And you've got a couple, or you've got a book, before I get into the 2 sketches that you did that we'll show based off the new cartoon series. You've got a book that I would love to spend, 5 minutes of you kind of talking about a little bit, because it's sold out. You're looking to do a reprinting, possibly a film, but could you talk about Maggie?
I certainly will.
Hold it in front of you, just in front of your shirt. There you go. There we go. Now we can see it.
Okay.
Perfect.
After we came back from camp, one of my very good friends, his name is Shiggy Abu. He was a jock. He played baseball, football, slam, did whatever sports in camp while I was sitting at the drawing board. But anyway, after camp, we were in the Boy Scouts together, and virtually post-war buddy. And then he joined the Navy and was stationed in San Diego. And then I moved down to LA to go to work in the business. Then in 1999, I decided to retire. And so I did. Then Shig contacted me and says, hey, I wrote a children's book, and would you be interested in illustrating? And I said, well, Shig, almost 50 years in the business, and I'm going to hang up my pencil for a while and just take it easy. And he was a little insistent. So I said, okay, Shig, send me the manuscript, which he did for this story. Then when I read it, I realized, it takes place in camp. And both of, although Shig was in a different camp, our childhood of being incarcerated was basically the same atmosphere and basically the same thing. So I went ahead and told Shig, I think I will look into it. Well, now the question was, if you were basically a pet lover, like Shig was, he had a German Shepherd, he had a canary, he had a turtle, he had goldfish and all that. When you had to give all this up to go to camp, what would a young kid do? Well, anyway, what Shig did was give his pets to his neighbor Russell, and in hopes that when he comes back from camp, the pets will still be around. And herein lies the story of a kid that loves pets, and so while in camp, he adopts a baby chick that fell out of the nest, because the kids were aiming at the nest with a slingshot, and one lucky shot, the bird tumbled out, well, still in the nest. And so it didn't hurt the bird, but Shig found an old shoebox, put the bird in, and brought it back to camp, and adopted it as a pet. And eventually, as the bird grew and was going to fly, the father clipped the wings and all that. And so it became a pet, and magpies could pick up talking. So now in Japanese, the bird would say Ohio, good morning, and also say hello, Maggie, and of course, as the bird got older and it got more frisky, then you had a little girl walking by, and the bird would do a bird whistle tweet, and then of course the bird was embraced by the older people in camp, and
There you
the
go.
bird would be quite playful, Well, the thing about this situation with Shig is the war was coming to an end. The government has now allowed the internees to return. The dilemma with Shig was, well, what am I going to do with this huge magpie that can't fly? You can't let it free, and so he didn't know of any kind of zoos or anything to donate it to, and it was sort of a sad situation. But the bird had a premonition that eventually Shig is going home. And so one morning, Shig comes down, looks in the cage, and Maggie is obviously sick. So he tries to nurse it back to health, but eventually Maggie passes away. Maggie was buried right under the guard tower, and then Shig had to eventually board the train and return to San Francisco. And so this book was done primarily for our own pleasure, but it was very difficult to find a big publishing company to take it on. I don't know if it was the subject matter, maybe a little too sensitive about little kids being incarcerated and all. So Shig and I decided, hey, let's self-publish it. So we found a nice printer, and we pooled our resources together and paid for maybe a 300 copy run. Immediately sold out. Of course, we sold it locally to like the Japanese American Museum, and the same in San Francisco. And we would actually go personally on book signing and sign copies and whatever. And it kept selling and selling. And we, to date, I think, Sheikh said we sold close to 25,000 copies. And
25,000.
yeah, and then now we're out again. But if we're going to reprint this, I'm going to add some new additional pages commemorating the Japanese American, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. I don't know if you heard of their heroic exploits during World War II, and then the MIS, which is the Military Intelligence Service, made up of young Japanese that spoke the language, so they were able to decode some of the Japanese secret codes and all that. And so we're going to devote a few pages in the book for that. But this book is now being made as an animated short subject.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's
in production right now.
And then we got the George Takei Sulu to do the narration as Shig.
Really? That is fantastic. So when does that come out?
It's in production now, and probably about the beginning of next year or so.
And do you have a platform that is it a Netflix? Is it, how is it being released?
Well, the first platform, the major platform, would be the Heart Mountain Foundation, and of course, uh, this is where the book takes place, in Heart Mountain.
Okay.
And so every year they have a pilgrimage, and the film is being financed by donors, people that are survivors of the camp, offsprings of the family that of and so we seem to be getting a good enthusiastic donorship, and so we're gonna hopefully premiere it at Heart Mountain next year, um, if this pandemic is not still hanging around. And
Well, I
so
think that is
that's our target date.
that is fantastic news. And talk about a passion project coming in various forms. I think congratulations on that, because
Well,
that's
thank you. I really appreciate that.
absolutely. We'll tell you what I wanted to do before we close out for today, and what I'm just going to refer to as Willie Ito Part 1 is would you mind? Oh my God, we gotta have you back. There's more to this.
Well, I gotta think of more, make up more stories.
Oh yeah, you can make up whatever you want to. So I would like to show, you've got a couple of sketches that you've done of pieces based off the new series, and I was wondering if, while you're showing the two new ones, and if you just want to hold them up in front of yourself,
Oh, okay.
what
Yeah.
do you think about the new cartoons that are being released on HBO through Warner Brothers? What do you think
Yeah.
about the new Looney Tunes?
Scott sent me stills from the latest two Looney Tunes, and so I had to copy it off of my little phone, and so I
Not a
hope
bad job, yeah.
captured all the essence. So apparently, the Daffy Duck I could see was handled very broadly, and almost like the golden age of Looney Tune style,
Mhm.
And then of course this one, actually this was really spread out, but I had to kind of condense it for the composition, and they were kind of going back to a little more of the earlier Bugs Bunny, a little more of the egg-shaped head Bugs Bunny.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
so these are the latest.
how do you feel about the new cartoons? Have you seen them? What do you think about them?
Well, I'm still a big fan of Chuck's cartoons, and I know that some of the animation is beautifully done, very broad. It was almost like a Bob Clampett style of animation, or Tex Avery, very broad, and but I haven't really had a chance to see enough of them to make a judgment. Uh, hopefully I'll see more of the newer Looney Tunes. Well,
Well,
as a matter of fact, one of my friend in Florence, Italy, he is my animation director on Hello Maggie, and he is also working on the latest Looney Tunes.
no kidding. Well, so you got a whole circle of connection that brings it all the way back to the beginning, which I think is fantastic. We'll tell you what, Willie, what I want to let everybody know again, like the website is, with the images originals from Willie, is chuckjonescatalog.com/Willie-Ito. And the two sketches that you just unveiled are available as well. And from what Scott told me, correct me if I'm wrong, we might see a few more.
Yeah. I'll be making more duplicates. Yeah.
So I love these. I love your animation style. I love the stories. There's so much more I want to get into with, how you, what do you still do in your current style, as far as, how do you keep fresh in just drawing? Do you still do life drawing? How does that translate into the images? And stuff that you do, passion projects that you have. I know Hello Maggie is one. So we'll save some stuff, and especially with the 3 tuners, which is you, Jerry, and Tony.
Oh, okay, that's great.
And yeah, would love to get into that. So as we close it out today, and Willie, I could honestly keep going for another hour or two. But as we close it out today, I just want to say I've had the pleasure of meeting you once last year for the Jones Gathering, and you're the real deal. You know, you're that. I never did get to meet Chuck, so to be able to, obviously with Craig and Linda and the family, you have that connection there. But to meet people who worked with Chuck and to have that kind of side of things, it was a thrill beyond measure to be able to meet you and just listen to what you, Jerry, and Tony. So you're the real deal, man. You were so nice, and you answered whatever questions were there. You're personable, you're humble, and you're extremely talented. And I want to thank you for being a part of our Chuck Jones ComicCon at Home Creativeside chat this week.
Okay, so that's great. And in closing, I like to say, there is life after 86.
Yes, there is, and you are showing it well, sir. Well, I want to again thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everybody on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us and getting to interact with Willie and hear some amazing stories and see some amazing artwork. I look forward to Willie. I look forward to round 2. So please do a round 2.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.